Okay, welcome everyone to this afternoon's session. I'm glad you're all been able to spend a bit of time today to join us in what is the fourth of 5 sessions that have been organised by Partners in Planning that are taking place this week. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Gregor Hamilton, and in my day job I'm the Head of Planning and Economic Development in Dundee City Council, and I have the pleasure of hosting this afternoon's session. The topic today is how planners can work together to support the climate change agenda. And I think it's a particularly interesting and topical matter to be looking at given what's happening in the world today. Yesterday's session focused on how we design climate resilient places, and that was chaired by Ivan Clark from Nature Scott, with contributions from Mike McCarthy from Collective Architecture on the Meadowbank Master Plan, Sheena Rayburn from Rayburn Farquhar Bowen on the Queensland Court Flood Management Retrofit Scheme, and Rolf Rocher from ERZ Landscape Architects on the North Maryhill Master Plan. The event is being recorded, so just so that you're aware, and along with the other 4 sessions that are taking place this week, they will all be made available on the Partners in Planning website, hopefully by the end of next week. But those attending today will receive an email notifying you that that recording is available. I would encourage you to tweet during this afternoon's event. The hashtag is PIP Climate Webinars. And as most of the attendees I think will be dialing in from home, I don't need to go through the usual formalities of letting you know what happens if there's a fire alarm or where the nearest toilets are. So I'll skip that and try and move on quickly so we can get into the meat of this afternoon's discussion. So we have 3 fabulous speakers that are quite diverse in terms of their background and what they're talking about, and we will move from a fairly strategic view down to some of the initiatives that are happening nationally, and then a focus on a particular case study which is close to my own heart because it's happening in Dundee. The 3 speakers that we have are Lynn Ward from the Infrastructure Commission, Daisy Narayanan from Sustrans, and Greg Cool from the Michelin Scotland Innovation Park. And the format for this afternoon is that each speaker will give a 10-minute presentation, and we'll go through each speaker one after the other, and then there will be an opportunity for a question and answer session. I'm sure many of you now will be experts in how to participate in a Q&A session in a virtual format like this. But for those that aren't, there is a question box that should be on your screen, and if you can type your questions into that throughout the proceedings, then we'll come to those once the 3 speakers have had the opportunity to make their presentations. So I really don't want to spend much more time introducing the topic. I want to get straight on to hearing from our 3 presenters. And first up, we have Lynn Ward. Lynn has worked in economic development for more than 25 years, most recently with the Infrastructure Commission for Scotland, where she's seconded from the Scottish Features Trust. She has a formal education in economics and a breadth of experience in infrastructure development, employability, business interventions, and related research. And most recently, this has included understanding good practice investment prioritisation and tools to achieve inclusive growth ambitions. So without further ado, I will pass over to Lynn.
Thank you, Gregor. So let me just make sure you've got my screen. Would you mind just acknowledging, Gregor, that you can see that?
I can see it, Lynn, yes.
Excellent, thank you. So yeah, thank you for the introduction and good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. So in the 10 minutes I have, as Gregor says, we've been posed this question, which is there on my screen. I hope you'll indulge me that I've slightly reposed the question. And hopefully at the end of the 10 minutes, what I'd like to say is show you that actually we know quite a lot about infrastructure and climate change, but actually there are a few areas where we could do better. And in terms of your role, primarily as planners, I suggest that these are very useful areas for you to consider. So first of all, we have this fairly extensive framework, and it covers all the way from legislation to plans that you as planners, particularly in local authority, are responsible for developing and implementing. But we also have probably a plethora of action plans in the middle here, where in one of the most recent responses to how we're doing from the Committee for Climate Change, which has just went to Parliament last month, which lets us see how we're actually doing in Scotland. And again, fairly recently, we have the draft infrastructure investment plan, which also reflects on, particularly on net zero carbon and the role of infrastructure. But what I would say is this framework primarily is a decarbonisation framework. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because there's two signs or two parts, if you like, of climate change response, and that is not just mitigation, i.e. decarbonisation, but there's adaptation. Now, I'm not going to speak about adaptation, that's part of your webinar series tomorrow, and it definitely needs or merits being looked at separately. So I'm really going to focus particularly on decarbonisation. So, as I say, we have this very extensive framework. What does it actually tell us? Well, it tells us quite a lot. It tells us that, as you can see there, that one of the big areas that we need to focus on, according to the Committee for Climate Change in 2018, is infrastructure for decarbonisation. And what they focused on specifically was areas such as decarbonisation of electricity. It was areas such as heat, and in particular transport, and particularly surface transport. The slide or the graph on the right-hand side shows you how we're doing from their report, which was submitted to Parliament last month. And it shows you that we've done a huge amount in terms of decarbonisation of electricity. There are other areas, however, that we've perhaps not done quite as well. So where are the areas that we need to focus on? So it's still exactly as the Climate Change Committee said. The big issues or areas for us in Scotland to think about, and for you as planners to think about, is transport and heat. Now, transport, I'm not going to speak about this in any great detail because I know Daisy will be speaking about this, but transport emissions and particularly surface transport emissions are a big challenge in Scotland. Transport, I think, is about 36% of emissions, and 70% of that are roads. So it's primarily non-public transport, if you like, where there's the big challenges in terms of emissions. And heat, primarily residential, but also industrial. Now, just to highlight that the graph on the right focuses on industry, sectors, so it doesn't necessarily relate to this, but ultimately these are still the two high areas that we need to respond to within Scotland. So these are the areas that we need to respond to, but we should not lose sight of the fact that over time, some of the relationship between these different sectors is changing. I just wanted to highlight that digital is actually an area that's increasing in terms of emissions, and possibly an area we need to keep a close watch on, particularly as we move to increasing our infrastructure to ensure that everybody has digital access. So just to be aware of that it's not a static thing, that things obviously keep moving. Another really important thing we know is that 80% of our existing infrastructure will be with us in 2050. I always have to take a step back when I say that, because I just think that's an incredible percentage. So what we're talking about is embodied carbon, and how Scottish Government in the recent draft investment plan has reflected that by suggesting a draft investment hierarchy, which turns around the often focus on new to a focus on maintenance. And I think that's something that you as planners need to be, again, very aware of as you're making planning decisions. So we know a lot, and that's not unsurprising, because in many ways it's an easy thing to know. We can measure, the data is there, and we can measure emissions quite clearly. So that's what we know, but what don't we know enough about in terms of making decisions? I would suggest what we don't know enough about is taking a broader view and taking a whole system approach to thinking about infrastructure, not just in its role in mitigation of climate change, but also in its role to support other policy agendas. I don't believe we should look at net zero carbon and climate change alone, and obviously that reflects again the policy arena. And again, the recent infrastructure investment plan, Scottish Government suggested 3 key areas which we should focus on in terms of infrastructure. And that was inclusive economic growth, sustainable places, and environmental sustainability. So these are some of the big areas that we are interested in as a society. They're broader than carbon, and we have to think about how that works together. So ultimately, we have to think about the interaction of infrastructure, not just in terms of carbon, but also in terms of how these other policy agendas and what's important to us as a society. And that's probably reflected in things such as the Just Transition Commission, amongst others, that we have to think carefully about carbon's context. And we have to think about trade-offs. Trade-offs is something I'm quite keen that we really get under the skin of, and I think that's not just about our relationship with our stakeholders internal to our organisations and cross portfolios, but it's also understanding what stakeholders want and what's important to them. So, for example, what do your communities want? What is really important to them? If you were to go to them with a particular amount of money to support investment and policy priorities, what would be their priorities? What trade-offs would they be willing to make in order that we can develop places in a sustainable way? And I think that's something that we could do more on. And it's a difficult one, but we again have the tools to do that. And much of this does take us back to saying, well, we lack some of the information. And how do we actually get to a place of being clear on the impact of infrastructure? And the Commission, we had Fraser Rallender do a piece of work around inclusive economic growth, and it was quite clear from that work that we don't know enough in particular about the role of infrastructure to support inclusive growth priorities. And therefore we need to go back to some of the fundamentals of establishing appropriate impact assessments when we look to develop infrastructure. And again, that's part of the new IIP consultation, considering what's the best way to do that. And we also need to look forward more. And I would suggest there's room there for us to think more carefully and more strategically about what kind of world it is that we want. And I know some of this is bread and butter to planners, but that's not consistent across the board, I would say, in terms of trying to bring together all these different policy priorities and to consider the role of carbon across that. So we know a lot, but there's areas of weakness, and particularly, I would say, in terms of understanding the role of infrastructure, trade-offs, and what people's different views are of their infrastructure. So I'd like to leave you with 4 points. We have a lot of information, but it's not as simple sometimes as just counting the carbon and saying which sector has to be decarbonised, because we don't know enough about how things work together, and we don't sufficiently evaluate the impact of infrastructure and its roles for our communities and our places. But irrespective of the fact that we don't have this perfect data, then you as planners and those involved in the planning system need to be able to create a pathway through this imperfect data. And that's something that I think we all need to be thinking about in the same way that government is thinking about this currently. And that also means who do you need to be talking to? So that's, again, cross-portfolio, cross-department, cross-sector, but it's also about our communities and having a much stronger and clear understanding of what it is that they want. So my question to you is, how do you ensure that you have the evidence you need to ensure that our places are the best that they can be? Thank you.
Lynn, thank you. That was really interesting, and I'm particularly struck by the statistic that you gave about the proportion of the infrastructure that we have today that will still be there in 2050, and the fact that the infrastructure that we are planning today will likely have a life long beyond that, and the importance of the decisions that we make now for quite some time into the future. So thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Daisy Narayanan, and Daisy is the Director of Urbanism for Sustrans, where her role involves interweaving policy, public realm design, and broad integration of key place principles to help create livable towns and cities. She's worked as an architect and urban designer in India, Singapore, and the UK, and believes passionately in creating places for people that reflect and complement the communities that live in them. Now, Daisy has been almost everywhere in the last few months. She's become the face of a big Sustrans initiative called Places for People, and I've had the opportunity to hear Daisy a few times in sessions like this, so I'm sure you're in for an interesting 10 minutes. So Daisy, over to you.
Thank you. Just wanted to check that you can see my screen, Gregor.
Yes, yeah, we can see and hear you.
And I want to apologize in advance to anyone who's seen these slides before, because as Gregory was saying, it's been quite a busy time. And it's fantastic, I think, because there's so much interest in the work that's happening in the low carbon transport, especially in work around 20-minute neighborhoods, and the collaboration that's happening between planning and transport is just incredible to see the conversations that's happening, and huge privilege to be part of quite a few of them as well. So thank you. So as Gregor said, I'm Daisy Narayanan. I'm the Director of Urbanism at Sustrans. But before I begin, I have a confession. I'm not a planner. I'm a recovering architect. I'm an urban designer, and over the past decade, my work has focused on sustainable transport. For the past 2 years, I found myself working more and more within the area of the climate crisis, climate emergency. I'm a commissioner at Edinburgh Climate Commission. I sit on the evidence group for Scotland's Climate Assembly. So it's been really interesting for me to put the place lens on some of these really key, interesting issues that and challenges that we're facing right now. I'm here to talk about sustainable active transport, but I'd like to take a cue from what Lynn just said and talk about places and put that within the context of how we together can shape our towns and cities as we look towards the future. How do we collectively ensure that our towns and cities are safer, more inclusive, more sustainable, more resilient? So today I'd like to focus on 3 things. Sorry, let me see how I move this. There we go. I'd like to focus on 3 things. As we look to address the triple challenge of the pandemic, a looming economic recession, and the climate crisis, what do we see as the future of mobility? Do we have an opportunity during this time of uncertainty to try things out on our streets? I'll look at some examples through the Spaces for Programme people that Gregory just mentioned, look at Dundee, and a couple of examples from Glasgow. And finally, how do we ensure that as we are accelerating change that we need to do right now, how do we make sure that it's inclusive, that it's just, and that it is equitable? Because most cities and towns came into being long before the motor car, but it sometimes seems that our cities and towns have been designed to lock in car dependency. And despite the brilliant policies and action plans that Lynn mentioned in her talk as well that are placed in Scotland, both nationally and locally, far too often our local roads and our local streets tend to look like this. In Sustrans, our vision is a society where the way we travel creates healthier places and happier lives for everyone. We want to bring our towns and cities back to people. Everything has to come back. It's all about people. And we want to bring people back to places. We could, of course, wait for some tech-driven future solution, but unlike our friends in Ford company, I don't think we have decades and decades to wait. The climate emergency is here, the climate emergency is now. We need to make sure that action can be taken right now. So sometimes, in my opinion, the simplest solution is right there outside our front door. Lockdown has proved that if you make our streets quieter, if you make our streets safer for people, if you make our streets safer for older people, for younger, for disabled people, people will come out and people will use the spaces. They'll thrive. They'll enjoy. They'll shop. They'll do things that they want to do in the places that are meant for them. So what does that mean? What do you mean when we say livable cities and towns for everyone? So in Sustrans, we believe that resilience for the future can be fostered through developing this and understanding the idea of livability, and then transport and walking and cycling, all of that then fits into that conversation, transport and planning and economic development. But what is it that we are collectively trying to get to? For us, a livable city or town has to have social connection at its very heart, has to have most of what you need, just a short walk or cycle away. The 20-minute neighborhood discussion that I'm sure all of you are having right now is one example of that. Roots, it has a place that celebrates its unique character, a place that is easy for people to move around in a healthy way, and a place that has clean air and green space for everyone to live and play in. And by play, I love the fact that people talk about play these days, and it's not just play parks and playgrounds. It's about us together enjoying the delights and wonders of what our places should be and could be. So our vision for change is that livable cities and towns will create places that connect us to each other. It's about human connections as much as it is about physical and digital connections, and where everyone can thrive without having to use a car. So there's no car dependency that's locked into our places as we find right now. But in the race to net zero, big change needs to happen quickly. And that doesn't mean that it has to be perfect on day one. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about our Spaces for People program, which is about temporary infrastructure that was put in response very quickly to the pandemic and when lockdown happened in early April, May time. The program has given us dramatic changes to our streets with an unprecedented speed of delivery. For those of us who worked on the ground, local authorities, who delivered projects, we know that any change on our streets, any change in mode takes so long. So for us, one of the things that this has demonstrated is we can make change quickly, and that many of these schemes are starting to show significant impact on human behavior. In Glasgow, for example, streets have transformed. They've removed a third of street parking, on-street car parking. And I believe they've created about 25 kilometers of extra space for social distancing. That's space for walking, for cycling, for making sure that we are safe during the pandemic and beyond. And this speed of delivery was unthinkable a year ago. And some of the data that's been collected has been quite impressive, showing close to 200% increase in cycling along Clyde Street, as an example. It's pretty amazing. But interventions can't stop here. While speedy delivery undoubtedly brings with it its own challenges, and through Spaces for People, we've seen the challenges that speedy delivery brings forward. The program is delivered to be iterative. It's delivered in a way that you can develop and evolve over time. You can adapt, you can engage, you can develop designs as you go through the process of delivery. And to me, that's the thing. As you look to the future, it is important that these kinds of projects are considered to be just the beginning. And they lay the foundation for evidence collection, data gathering, to start to design things for how we want our future cities and towns to look like. And one great example has been Union Street in Dundee. A street previously dominated by parking has been gradually transformed. First, picnic tables, temporary planters that were already there. And now they've integrated the work of a local artist with more substantial street furniture. It's been strong support from local businesses and residents, and it'll be really interesting to see where it goes from here next. Glasgow, Kelvin Way, it's quite interesting to see how that's evolved as well. So during the height of lockdown, that street was closed to traffic completely. And as we are starting to emerge from lockdown, that's adapted and evolved. They put planters in and opened it up to traffic again, some parts of it to traffic, but taken space away from the motor car. And again, it's really interesting to see that that's happened because of feedback that's come in through communities and people who using that space. What about Glasgow's other temporary interventions, and what if they were to change over time? For example, this footway widening in Bath Street, designed to allow social distancing, could be developed over time to integrate planting, like the Grey to Green scheme in Sheffield. Or outside city chambers, perhaps George Square's street closure could form a new social space for the city, similar to this public square in Strasbourg. So adapting these schemes also allows for multiple public health benefits to be integrated within these schemes, not just providing for physical distancing. The humble bollard can develop into a play space. It can develop into a haven for biodiversity, inclusive routes for mobility for all users. And these schemes really have a potential to unlock so many benefits, not just transport, and can really be the start for creating resilient, livable cities and towns for everyone. And coming back to for everyone, I think we need to make sure that the systemic injustices that are currently built into our transport system cannot be exacerbated. We have to make sure that we overcome them and we create a transport system that is genuinely for everybody. For example, there's a real intersection of inequalities, and we talk about climate crisis and transport. At the moment, we have a transport system that's designed around a presumption of car ownership, when up to 49% of households in the most deprived, disadvantaged areas don't have access to a car, a presumption of 9 to 5 office commutes, a presumption of A to B journeys, assuming that people only go from home to workplace to home. There's major roads that cut through inner cities, imposing poor air quality on low-income households. And more shockingly, children in Scotland's 20% most deprived communities are 3 times as likely to be in a collision with a motor vehicle as children in the least deprived 20%. So there is a huge challenge that we need to ensure that we are inclusive. We're making sure that anything new that we create, that we move towards, is truly, truly inclusive and starts to address some of these systemic injustices that are built in. And we have to include as many diverse voices, not just in the initial design process, but fundamental to the onward iteration and reconsideration of designs as well. Being able to adapt spaces as a result of feedback is key benefit of temporary designs and will be vital to the development of any infrastructure going forward. But I'd like to end on a provocation on how we do so, and I've talked about this in the past. As we start to move towards a more online world, with our consultation online, with the discussions online, how do we make sure that we are able to be inclusive? We are able to continue to have the trust and develop new relationships, continue to foster new partnerships, and make sure communities are involved. Who pays for it? It takes time, it takes commitment. Who funds it? And finally, to make sure that our civil space, our online spaces are civil and they're not toxic. And sometimes some of these discussions around change can get quite toxic. And how do we make sure that people feel safe to say what they feel? And we can make sure that it is truly a collective voice that starts to shape what we're trying to do. So in conclusion, just looking at the uncertain future ahead, we need to acknowledge that many parts of the normal that we longed for were broken. And we have an opportunity now to take a proactive approach and really shape where we want to go. And good urbanism celebrates the crossovers, as we know, between the quality of our places, public health, economy, transport, education, air quality, social justice. And we have, through COVID-19, it's highlighted the need for a collective, proactive approach to address these crossovers and ensure that people and place are at the heart of shaping this new world. And let's do it together. Thank you.
Daisy, thanks. That was really interesting. And there are few positives, I think, that many of us can draw from the challenges that we've gone through in 2020. But I think the success of the Spaces for People initiative and the way that towns, cities and smaller communities have responded and adapted, and the speed with which it's happened and you highlighted, I think just shows the power of what can be achieved. And it's just unfortunate that it's taken a health crisis to really move that forward. But let's try and not lose sight of it. And I know the example that you used in Dundee, we are already starting to think how we can make that temporary intervention something that becomes much more permanent. So thank you again. I remind you all, please do submit questions in the questions box. We're about to hear from Greg Cool, but then there'll be an opportunity to bring all of our speakers back and to debate some of the issues that we've been hearing about. So, as I mentioned before, Greg Cool is the Chief Executive of Michelin Scotland Innovation Park, and he took on that role just over a month ago, I think. He's spent most of his career working with Michelin in production management, brand licensing, business-to-business marketing and motorsports. I think that role has taken Greg across different parts of the world with that company, but he was drawn back to Scotland by the opportunity to lead a talented team in a dynamic and evolving world of sustainable mobility and low carbon energy in what is an incredibly exciting project. It turned, and I don't want to step on too much of what you're going to say, Greg, but just about 2 years ago, one of Dundee's major manufacturing employers announced that it was to cease tyre production in Dundee, and it was a massive blow to a city which has multiple challenges. But I think the story that we'll hear a bit about from Greg just shows how you can create something out of an adverse situation that really puts the city, the region, Scotland, I think, on the map in a way that will be terribly fruitful for the future. So without any further comment from me, over to you, Greg.
That's great. Thank you for that introduction, Gregor. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So I've got quite a lot of slides, but I'll try and be as efficient as possible. As Gregor mentioned, the Michelin Scotland Innovation Park was born out of a fairly dramatic incident a couple of years ago when Michelin, after 50 years of presence in the local economy, decided for market reasons that it was time to announce the closure of the plant. However, three partners got together, Michelin, Dundee City Council and Scottish Enterprise, and said, well, we've got 32 hectares of ground here, a talented workforce. Is there something different that we can do with it? And there was born the Michelin Scotland Innovation Park, which is intended to become a world-class innovation park in Dundee with a very strong focus on sustainable mobility and decarbonisation. In terms of the offer that we're presenting to potential tenants, and you'll see this is all about bringing together businesses in a cluster of a dynamic cluster of production and innovation. Excellent infrastructure. We are going to develop an advanced skills academy, support packages, innovation expertise, and also I'll try and demonstrate some ideas about sustainable energy. You see the park here. It's 32 hectares, as I mentioned. It's bounded by the greenery that you can see along the four edges, but the whole park is designated for industrial use, and therefore, if we need to expand, potentially we can do. A £90 million investment was recently made by Michelin, and that included the building of the warehouses that you see to the left of your screen. And they've now really provided us with a 75,000 square metre legacy, and one which we can benefit from. So as I said, 75,000 square metres of fully appointed manufacturing units, and our idea here is to attract advanced manufacturing in terms of EV batteries or hydrogen production, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, potentially wind turbine componentry as well. We've also got space and expertise to innovate, and our intention is to build an innovation hub. That innovation hub will allow us to bring on to the campus both academia and entrepreneurs and smaller businesses and larger businesses to try and ideate and create and move these ideas from conception right the way through to an industrial and commercially viable operation. The idea again is to work on hydrogen and fuel cells. We're lucky enough to have St Andrews University as one of our partners, and St Andrews, as well as the local Eden campus, they are also in charge of the hydrogen accelerator, which is designed to try and develop as rapidly as possible technology in the hydrogen sector. We are working with Abertay University, who have expertise in artificial intelligence and also virtual reality, and Dundee, who bring to us their skills in terms of entrepreneurship and advanced learning. So the idea, if I can summarize it, is to, at the top right of the screen, is to create a campus, whilst at the same time, at the bottom left, benefiting from all the industrial workshops and warehouses that have been put in place there, and use them. Okay, if I move on quite quickly, a third element which is very key is to create an Advanced Skills Academy. The Advanced Skills Academy will be in partnership with Dundee and Angus College, one of the foremost colleges in Scotland to provide a full spectrum of training and upskilling, but also bespoke courses. So if we have a tenant who wants to come on site but has particular skills needs, we can talk to them before that, develop the packages, train and upskill their workforce before even they actually arrive on site. And we also have sustainable energy from 3 sources. The first being the steam and electricity from waste MVV plant that's just situated nearby. Electricity from the 2 × 2 megawatt wind turbines which are installed on site. And thirdly, most of the buildings have been purpose built such that we can put solar panels on the roof when the time comes. And our objective, as well as contributing meaningfully to the local economy, as well as developing technology which will hopefully help Scotland achieve its net carbon zero by 2045 targets, it's also to regenerate the 840 jobs which unfortunately have gone since the closure of the plant. I'll try and talk you through a little bit of the work that's ongoing at the moment. Firstly, as you can imagine, with a workshop space of 75,000 square meters and a production environment, we have to decommission, and little by little that decommissioning is nearing completion, and we've emptied all the workshops and all the warehouses of the equipment that was in there previously. There is some demolition work. Some of the buildings were no longer really fit for purpose, and some of them are now obsolete because the steam, for example, for heating and power will be coming from the MVV plant next door and not from our boiler house. So you can't hear it at the moment, but there's a fair bit of demolition work ongoing, due to be completed by 2020. The area in red is primarily the part that's going to go. And then there's some transformation works. What we recognise is that we have some large companies who are very interested in coming here, but also some smaller ones and even some entrepreneurs who are moving through the development phase, starting off in an embryonic way, but quickly want to grow. And the idea is to have some purpose-built but very flexible units to allow them to build their business. And obviously we want to create the Skills Academy, and we have quite a large workshop in preparation to allow us to do that. One of the big advantages of these workshops is there's a significant height, upwards of 6-7 meters, and cranes which will allow them to have some pretty chunky equipment in there to work on. In terms of our tenant pipeline, we have around about 80 potential tenants in our books at the moment. These have been pre-filtered, pre-qualified to ensure that we meet their needs and that they are aligned with our mission of sustainable mobility and decarbonisation, as well as also generating the jobs which I talked about. That being said, if they don't fit, that doesn't mean to say that we drop them. What we try to do is find other agencies or other local authorities who might be interested in helping them develop. So as you can see here, about half our potential pipeline comes from either Tayside or the rest of Scotland, and the other half is out with Scotland, for example, the rest of the UK, Europe, or the rest of the world, and we're working closely with Scottish Development International to forge these links. And you see to the right-hand side of your screen all the different sectors which are represented, with quite a heavy representation of batteries and hydrogen, as you might imagine. I try to have a think about issues or questions or aspects which are particularly relevant in the planning domain, and I've tried to describe them here. The first is that obviously there are demolition and repurposing considerations, and one of those which is quite high in our mind is how do we create the campus feel, but at the same time build industry just next door, and these mean things like having open spaces, green areas, purpose-built buildings, and also trying to remove the high level of security, visibility that's been there in the past. Secondly, it's an extremely dynamic market in which we're operating, and we're very keen to have first mover advantage. There are other sites which are trying to repurpose themselves, not necessarily as we are purely focused on sustainable mobility. We're quite unique in that aspect. However, they can offer other things to potential tenants. So we need to move quickly. But as Daisy said, speedy delivery brings its own challenges as well. The third is we've got multiple investors, quite large organisations as investors. They have varying expectations, but they want to be certain and confident when we say we're going to do something that we can actually deliver on that promise. Lynn mentioned stakeholder views and being inclusive, and it's very important for us that we can integrate the new park into the local community and enjoy the kind of relationship that the Michelin plant of old enjoyed with local stakeholders and representatives. And last but not least, we're working in the sustainable mobility environment, and what we want to do is obviously facilitate travel and accessibility. What does that mean? It means that now we're faced with social rejection of non-sustainability and an increasing pressure on everyone to try and move quickly. There is a data and artificial intelligence revolution. So our work here is not just all about nuts and bolts and physical things. Using data to better effect is of great interest. I don't know if you noticed, but recently UPS in America did a study. As you know, in America, you can turn right on a stop sign, and they worked out through data analysis that if they programmed their routes such that their trucks could turn right all the time, even though turning left was on paper a quicker route, they could save $5 to $10 million per year in fuel. So you see there straight away a link between commercial activity and environmental responsibility. Automated driving and electric powering is obviously facilitated by artificial intelligence, and therefore we're working on projects like last mile delivery, where potentially autonomous vehicles or drones take the place of the diesel powered trucks that are used today. And also increased asset utilization, such as, for example, in France. I'm just back from France, so I'm more familiar with what happens over there perhaps than here. But you have the Vélib, which are the bikes, and also the Autolib in Paris, which are electric vehicles but free for all to use. So there's quite a significant melting pot in there, important for us to take into consideration. I've probably burned my 10 minutes. Thank you very much. Welcome to pose any questions. And if you want to follow us, we're on all the usual social media channels, and we'd be happy to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Greg, thanks for running through that. I know there's a huge amount of work going on there. I think it's really heartening to hear about a project which will have an economic impact, but is also respectful of the wider global national issue of climate change and will play a positive contribution. And I think there's a really interesting thing that will happen in the next 10, 20 years about how we get around. I think mobility and accessibility will be one of those dynamic sectors that will change at a pace, and I think there's a real challenge for planners as to how we respond to that, and the issues and challenges that we faced in the last 10 years will be quite different to the next 10 years, and that possibly goes back to some of the early discussion that we had with both Lynn and Daisy. So we now come to the part of the agenda where we get an opportunity to ask some questions of our speakers. So thank you for those who've already submitted some. There'll still be an opportunity if you've thought of something now to ask it, and we'll try and get through a few of these before we finish at 5 p.m. So first of all, I'll go for one from Stefano Smith, and it's about livable cities and how they can address some of the significant challenges our high streets and town centres are facing. I think this is a particularly topical thing for planners. We are trying to implement the government's town centres first principle, but at a time where COVID and other longer term trends are really placing challenges at the heart of our towns, cities. So I think naturally I'll pass that one to Daisy first, but I think I'll come to the other two speakers because I think there's definitely links to the topics of your presentation as well that we can pick up. So Daisy.
Yeah, I mean, we live in such interesting times, I think, and with COVID, we've seen such a huge shift in how we do everything, how we live our lives. We're living more locally, how we shop, how, what's going to happen to offices. Are they going to come back into city centers? What's going to happen to, how are our suburbs and our town centers going to evolve and change? So yeah, I think we are now in a position where unless we take this as an opportunity, I know it's quite a tough word to use when there is so much grief associated with what's happening over the past 18 months. But it's also an opportunity to genuinely come together, planners and transport, spatial transport experts and economic development and housing, and come together to see how can we work together. There's limited resources. There's not going to be much resource money out there. So how do we come together and make the most of what we have? We'll have to be more courageous. I think we'll have to be more bold. We'll have to be radical because 2050 is not far away. So I sit on the Town Centre Review panel, and we've been having some really interesting discussions around how we make sure that the economic recovery is not pitted against the environmental, is not pitted against the social and equalities issues. So there's a lot, I think, for us to grapple with when we are looking at how our towns and cities are going to change. But I think we also have these conversations have already started in Scotland. The work that's being done by Lynn Infrastructure Commission colleagues is fantastic, and some brilliant case studies that Greg mentioned. So we've got things to build on and really accelerate and move faster.
Thanks, Daisy. You mentioned the Infrastructure Commission there. So Lynn, do you want to pick up any thoughts that you have on that question?
What jumps to mind is how this agenda really accelerates the place agenda. And we have had place being increasingly important at a policy position for quite some time. But to what extent we have made it sufficiently embedded within our system, again, I would query. And the Commission suggested that that needs to be embedded, and it needs to be embedded in a way in which is a requirement, and that's passed over to planners, and particularly in government, to suggest the best way to do that. So it's about making good practice the best practice and consistent practice. And there's lots of people better positioned than me to comment on that. But for me, that, if I have to look at an overarching policy agenda, that's what it is. So it's bringing, as Daisy says, the right people around the table, and very clearly including stakeholders. So again, we heard some good examples there in both Greg and Daisy's experience about working with communities. So it's understanding what they want. And I really do suggest that we don't sufficiently understand what communities want. And picking up on Daisy's point about lack of resources, that's why we have to talk about trade-offs. That's why we have to have adult conversations where we say there's only this amount of money, what are your priorities? And that's where every place will be very unique, because people in those different cities, different towns, different conglomerations, they will all want something quite different, and we have to be flexible enough to do that. But the place, principle, standards, etc., give us that framework.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Greg, is there anything else you want to add?
Just a quick one. I think things will be different, but I think in other circumstances, people want things to be just the same. For example, you want a dust cart to come round and pick up your rubbish the same as it does today. However, in the future, that dust cart probably won't be diesel. It will probably be electric with a hydrogen range extender. So you have to think about the infrastructure required to service them, but also the kind of analysis on duty cycles to adapt the type of vehicle to the conditions. I mean, if it's one that has to do a run which is out in the countryside compared with another one that has to go up to the hill town in Dundee, for example, you're looking at something slightly different. The other thing that strikes me in all of the discussions I've had is if you can bring it round to something that is commercially viable, then you get a lot of traction, you know, and that commercial viability may come through legislation, or it may come purely through the age-old entrepreneurship of seeing an opportunity and filling it.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Move on now to a question from Ivan Clark. It's directed to Daisy, and it's about how do we secure more money for the design co-production elements of projects similar to the one you've talked about. But I'll maybe expand that, and you know, thinking about infrastructure more broadly, it's one of the challenges that planners have faced for such a long time, and it's been a focus of the recent modernising planning agenda and the new Planning Act. So we'll touch upon, I think, Lynn's presentation as well, but maybe I'll start with Daisy, but I'll give both other speakers an opportunity just to think about the type of infrastructure that we're going to need for the future, and then how that's going to be funded.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about co-design, it is resource intensive. You know, you need people to be there, to go out and to do the outreach, to speak, to knock on doors, and you know, pre-COVID days, and you need resource, and that is the age-old dilemma or question around capital versus revenue. You know, there is a need to make sure that there is enough resource money, or that there is enough money that we can. We need to do more for the money that we have. So which is why I think, you know, Lynn, you mentioned the whole systems approach or the place principle. You know, putting the place lens on it allows us to take, you know, to use that resource money, which isn't as much as, you know, it can't do everything, to do more than it has done in the past. So if you're doing community engagement or co-design on a park in an area, for example, you know, you're able to then look wider than that and look at the neighborhood and look at the 20-minute concept as part of that. So it's a very, I know it's really challenging in terms of, you know, co-design. It takes time, it takes people, and the two things we don't have right now are time and resource, as much as we should. So yeah, we need to find more innovative ways of making the money go further.
Thank you. Lynn, do you want to comment from your perspective?
Absolutely. I think the whole system approach is one angle, and I think it's probably imminently the most useful angle, and that means that we have to stop developing places through the silos of sectors, silos of portfolios and departments, and we have to actually join up our organisations and the money that they all individually have to make the most of what we can do. So there's a wee bit of that, which is probably picking up the point of making better use of the money that we have. So it's using it differently and using it in a joined up way. And I think for me, that's one of the bigger challenges, big behaviour change challenges that we have for those of us who are working in the sector, particularly to work differently and to share budgets. Yeah, I suppose that's what I'm saying, to share budgets. The other thing maybe just to drop in there is also, if we're thinking about assets and that asset hierarchy, if we are not automatically going to developing, and again, this is a place-based approach, if you're not automatically going to, we need a new community centre, or let's build a new one, and in fact you're going, okay, we need this service, what facilities and assets do we have that we can use, then there's ways in which money can go further as well. So I do think what's inherent to that place-based approach also helps you be more effective with assets, resources, and what you have. So it's not always about getting more money, but there might be a bit of that required, but it's also about effective collaboration, effective working with what we have.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. That's a really interesting point. Greg, I mean, in the same vein, I think Stefano's asked another question just about infrastructure to support hydrogen and its contribution to net zero. There's maybe a perspective that you can give about how that might be delivered.
Yeah, I'll try to do that. Just to say, I'm totally with and aligned with what Lynn was saying there. I think there has to be collaboration and collective works to make the money go as far as possible. Yeah, hydrogen. I mean, I'm starting to learn a lot more about hydrogen. Some people will say, well, it is hydrogen rather than battery, or battery rather than hydrogen. Our viewpoint is that both are completely complementary. And we can almost envisage that in and around cities, when you're talking about last mile delivery or everything within 20 minutes, battery power certainly has big advantages. But when you start to go beyond there, because we still are going to have haulage, we're still going to have long routes, we're still going to have aviation, we're still going to have shipping, then hydrogen technology comes into its own. But hydrogen to generate electricity. The other part that's very important in terms of hydrogen is that it's one way of storing all the power that's generated by renewable sources when you don't actually need it. Okay, so it's never windy at 7:30 when it's the break after Coronation Street. So you need somehow to be able to transform that electrical energy and either store it directly in batteries or indirectly by transforming it to hydrogen and then transforming it back again. Other things which we can imagine are using the same infrastructure that we have today to deliver natural gas. Tomorrow that could deliver hydrogen. So instead of converting it to electricity, hydrogen is used in your domestic heating systems. Also what you do with petrol stations, you know, because cars are still going to want to travel. They'll still have a certain autonomous range. Is it possible to repurpose a filling station today, which is using, you know, supplying diesel or petrol, and allow it to supply hydrogen, perhaps even generate hydrogen through solar panels or wind turbines at the actual filling station, and then it'd be able to that thereafter. So there's a plethora of ideas at the moment, but all of them are focused on not only throwing everything up in the air and starting again, but actually trying to reuse what we already have. Hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Greg. I'm conscious we've just got a couple of minutes. I'll maybe just take advantage of my position as presenter and ask a question. I think most of the audience probably are planners, and I think you've probably all got some experience of working with planners in your own roles. And looking ahead, is there a particular skill that you think we need to focus on developing within the planning profession that helps other professionals from other disciplines to achieve these shared objectives that we have? Just a very quick off the top of your head response to that. So I'll maybe start with Lynn and not give you any chance to think about it, and then we'll come to Greg, then Daisy.
It's the soft skills, because planners are good at the technical skills and many are very good at soft skills, but it's the collaboration, bringing people together, facilitating, so it's the soft skills.
Okay, thanks. Greg?
You know, Lynn, I would agree with you there. I don't have particularly a lot of experience working directly with planners. What we do have here is an excellent relationship with the local planning authority, perhaps in part driven by the urgency of our situation. But yes, soft skills and helping bring people together and make sense of all the sometimes diverse views is key. Yeah.
Okay, Daisy, last word to you.
I'm going to go with empathy, and I suppose it builds on the soft skills.
Nice.
And empathy. I think we need more of that in the world generally, not just planners.
Okay, I think that's a really positive and helpful note to finish on.
Yeah.
Thank you all for your contributions this afternoon. I certainly found it very interesting, and I'm sure those that have joined us this afternoon have likewise learned a lot, as well as seeing some really interesting examples and some thought-provoking comment from you. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Now, I guess just a couple of things before we close. There will be an email that is issued to all participants after the event, just to let you know when the recording is available. It will also be on the Partners in Planning website, and as I said before, we should hopefully get that out to you next week. Please remember there is another session tomorrow, the 5th of the week-long session, so if you do have the opportunity and you've nothing else to do at 4 o'clock on a Friday, please sign up for that. Last thing I would say is that when you log out, I believe there will be a few short questions that you will get, and be grateful if you could answer those. But finally, I would just thank you all again for your participation this afternoon, for asking questions, and particularly to the speakers for their time and their commitment and thoughts. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Gregor.
Thanks, Gregor.